Hello everyone. Let's talk about using the paintbrush in Adobe Illustrator. So the paintbrush, if we go to the left hand side here of our tools, our paintbrush is this icon right here. Notice if I go ahead and stop my cursor right on it, I'll click on that once, and if I left click and hold, I've got two different selections. I've got the paintbrush tool and the blob brush tool. Now here's sort of the difference. The paintbrush tool paints with a stroke or outlines, and the blob brush paints with fill. Now, we'll talk about that more in a second. Let's go ahead and click on it first here with the paintbrush on the stroke. And I'm going to go ahead and first, and just now with my cursor here over the artboard, I'm going to go ahead and just draw a squiggle line here. And there we are. So I've got these nice little squiggles, and just kind of nice drawing this simple little line here. Now, within this line that I've got here, I can go ahead and change it. You'll notice that if I make a really jagged line, you notice that it smooths out. The program smooths it out by itself. What we can do is by double clicking on the tool, we open up the paintbrush tool options. So what I can do now is, within this, I can go ahead and I can have a stroke that is accurate or is more exacting as to the type of stroke that I make, or I can have one that's very, very smooth. Now, I can have the option when I do this that I can fill new brush strokes, keep selected, or edit selected paths. I can go just one at a time and pick and choose what I'm using. So what I can go ahead and do there is go ahead and just leave it right where it's at. That's what I'm going to end up doing. Now where it says within, that means how accurate you want it to be within 5 pixels, 6, 9, 12, up to 20. It's really up to you. Usually 20 is pretty, 2 is pretty good. Keeps it nice and tight. Now I can go ahead and say okay. And so let's go ahead and first off, I'm going to go ahead and go smooth and say okay. Now I'll go ahead and draw a line and show you. So I'm going to go ahead here, really, really super jagged, and that's smooth. So it smooths that out. Now, because there's no more little tiny little areas there. So let's go ahead now and do the next one. I'm going to go ahead and double click it and put it toward accurate. Say okay. Now I'll go back and do it again. And accurate, as you can see, keeps it very, very close. It didn't simplify it. The edges aren't, the ends are not pointed and sharp like the other side, right? These are more smoother, more curved ends, right? And we have a little subtle turning in some of the object shapes. So again, that difference between one or the other. But typically, I'll tend to keep it right here in the middle, and I'll pretty much keep the rest of the selections just as they are. So we'll say okay. Now, we're going to go ahead and with the object here, I'm going to go ahead and click on the lock, and I'm going to hide that layer. Then I'm going to come back up and add a new layer. Okay, now my new layer, let's go ahead and try again. This time what I'm going to do is I've got my paintbrush up here, and I've my paintbrush selected. But this time what I'm going to do is, you notice the line that I'm going to draw this time. So I'm going to start line here, right? And let me go back and select that. And with the line that I'm going to select this time is I can use that paintbrush tool, but I can go back and vary that stroke. So if I want to be able to go back in and up the weight on it, so like here, well, I can certainly do that and draw my object. See that? And when I select it with my black arrow, you notice we see just a one stroke inside there. We see one particular line, and that's the thickness of the stroke. And again, like we did in the last couple videos where we can change the size, yeah, I can grab a corner and I can make it narrower, longer, I can make it fatter, right? And change that shape like we've done before, okay? So I can do all that. Now what I can do also while it's selected, I can certainly change the color, right? There's one there. I can go back over to the other swatch panel over here and just click right through them. And just change lots and lots of colors in there, okay? Now, that being the case, so I've got basically shape that I can go ahead and draw. I've got my paintbrush, but let's talk a bit about drawing with different types of paintbrush ends. Okay, I'm going to lock this layer, and I'm going to hide it, and add a new layer. And now before this one, I'm going to select the paintbrush again. Okay, and let's go ahead and I'm going to change the color here. Oh, let's make it black, and I'm going to turn the stroke or the fill off. Okay, so I've just got the stroke only. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the right hand side here, and you see where it says brush, because again we're on the painting option right now. So if I select back over here, I've got some brushes that are sitting in here and a brush menu. So I can click on one of the sort of preset like the charcoal feather brush. Okay, and by selecting that one, I can come over to the stage here, and you'll see I get a line that has that feathering. Okay, now certainly I can change the size if I want to, right? Notice I brought that size up, made it really, really fat and wide. I can go back and select a size as it is and go back and change it down. So I model that right back down. I can take it back up again just by simply selecting that. So I've got a lot of options there when it comes to that. Now, one of the nice things also too is that when I am using a shape like this, a custom shape that has this like the charcoal on here, let me go back and select my paintbrush tool, that you'll notice I have this taper, that when I'm done I have a taper. So if I draw, right, I said heavy firm lines, I get a pretty solid line. But if I go in and then I lift, I get this sort of softer, longer line, right? There we go, we got a longer taper on there. So you can see I have a lot going on there with that taper. Now, there are some preset sizes that are here, right? So I can go ahead and select one of them here. Let's say I go back to maybe a diagonal one here, an oval. That's a diagonal. And I can go back in here, and I can back in and draw a line there. Nice, that is. Gets back to a nice smooth line there for me. Okay, so I can make that a little bit larger. You can see that diagonal in the piece. All right, you see that shape. See it right here. Now, what I can do is also go back in. There is a subset in here, so I'm going to lock this layer and hide it, and I'm going to add a new layer, and I want to show you down below here. Again, we still have our brushes selected, we still have our black, but all I've done now is go back here, and I'm going to add a new layer right in the box with the white X in it. And I'm going to go ahead right here, and underneath this brush pad that's right here, there's this little icon that looks like a little shelf of books. Okay, and this is the library. So I click on that. Suddenly I have all of these different little library icons here that I go for. Let's say go with arrows and special, right? And so I end up with all of these interesting little shapes that are here that I possibly can use. Look at all those. So I can select one of those, and I can go ahead and click and drag my line here. See that? I get a nice long line. So I can select any one of these, and I can go ahead and get a shape, right? Of course, while it's still selected, let me go and select the center of that, and I can take that down a little bit, right? Shrink that guy up. Get a fun line there. So you can see I can go through and pick any of the ones that are here. Now, I can go ahead and close this one, head back over to the library, and I can say select artistic. Now, I still will say within artistic, there's a lot here that you can experiment with. Myself, I tend to like the ink one myself, or the calligraphic. The ink is rather nice. Here's the ink panel here, and I move my cursor to the bottom. I can left click and drag to open that wider. And I kind of like this sort of tapered one here that has this little tapered in, kind of round at the front and tapered on the back. And I can come back in. Oops, my brush tool. And so I get this nice little line there. Notice it's blunt to the front, tapered to the back. Right? So I can go ahead and up that thickness there a little bit. And there's that line again. So I get a slightly thicker version of it. Now, again, I can go back in, even a tool like something as simple as one of these little spatters. So we check the one like this, and I go back up. You see that? It does that spatter pattern. So wherever I go, makes the spatter pattern. See? Follows through that. Now I can go Command Z to get rid of those. Command or Control Z. Sort of blot some of those out. So I can go back in now, and again I can close this window up. I can head back in to my library, and I can select any one of these. There's so many different ones in here. There are borders, things for brushes for borders, for bristle brushes, decorative brushes, all kinds of different ones that are available, right? This one's even a bristle brush. Look at that, isn't that neat? I can select this one over here. Ends up looking like smudged charcoal, doesn't it? Put a medium-sized one in there. Look at that. Pretty nice. So you get a lot of different options with the different brushes that are here. Okay. So now you can go ahead and collect or create a custom brush shape if you want to. And a custom brush shape is something where, and I'll show you how to use that. It's a different kind of tool to use. So a brush can be pretty much made out of anything you want. So we can go ahead and create an object out of it. Go ahead and do my brush here. So if I go ahead and just grab the regular paintbrush and I go ahead and just make a squiggle that looks like this, right? Maybe I want to taper it a little bit. Maybe I want it to be a little bit thicker. So I have to select my arrow, select the object, and then maybe make it a little bigger, right? And then what I can do is I can take this object, right, as an object, and I can just go literally left click and drag it into my brushes, release, and it asks me, says, oh, what kind of brush do you want to be? Well, let's see, let's go ahead and make it a art brush. That'll stretch it out. A scatter brush is just that. You end up with a scattered line. And a pattern, that's just it, makes a pattern. So we'll say okay on the art brush. And the art brush is just going to stretch it out. And with the second window right here, I can scale it proportionally, stretch to fit a long stroke. I can change the direction of it and the color. Okay. Right now I'm going to keep all the presets just as it is. Say okay. And I will go ahead and use my paintbrush. And I've got this brush now selected. So I can come in now and I can draw lines. But notice that when I draw that straight line, it has a wave to it. Right? I draw a straight line, but it has a wave to it. And that's because the original image has a wave built into it. Whereas these other ones, if I choose one of the other ones here, and I draw a line, a straight line is a straight line. It doesn't vary. Okay? So making a custom brush and dragging it into your brushes, very, very simple to do. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and lock this layer and hide it. Now, let's go back up to my basic brushes here. So I got my basic brushes, and I'll choose my basic one. One of the nice things that a line is able to do is that, let's say you have an object and you've drawn an object out. Okay, let me go ahead and select my tool here. Oops, I have to be on an unlocked layer. Add a new layer. There we are. So I'll go to my paintbrush and I'm going to go and draw an object, and I'm not going to complete it. I've got a hole right there. I've got a gap. Okay, and with this gap that's right there, I cannot fill this with a color. Okay, I cannot fill this with a color. So I can do one or two things. One, I can either try to use the white arrow to grab what we call the anchor point, these little anchor points here, and I can try to drag this down to overlap, and that would close the shape. We'll talk more about points in a little while, and that would close it. Then I can fill it with color if I wanted to. Or the other option is that if I have an object drawn, then I can go ahead and I can then go back and I can draw a line on top that covers over from one side and then over to the other, and then that closes it also. But the secret is to both of these lines, you have to group them and put them together. So I select the one, and to group it, to lock the old line and the new line together, we go Object, and I'm going to go ahead and say Group, which locks it. Then I go to the second one, go Object and Group, and that locks it together. So now we have 1 and 2. All right, so this was part 1 of using the brush tool. When we come back in our next video, we'll go ahead and talk about using the brush tool with the blob brush. So go ahead, experiment a little bit. Play with your brush sizes, play with a little bit, give yourself 5 minutes. Have fun.